as well as execution support for companies that are looking to enter markets or scale up and connect international capital with domestic activity.
Okay, thank you very much, Troy. Okay, now our final panelist is Wayne, joining us also from KL. Welcome, Wayne.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here again with all my esteemed panelists. I'm Wayne. I've been in Asia for about 25 years. Originally from Australia, but really enjoying being in Kuala Lumpur. I've been in supply chain for about 30 years, 20 of that as a logistics service provider, and all around Asia. Look forward to having some great conversations with everyone. Thank you.
Okay, great, excellent. All right, so we get started again with some of our topics, and again, feel free to ask a question using the Q&A tab located on the right side of the screen. If you have any question for any of the panelists on any of the topics related to cold chain in Asia, go ahead. We'll take those questions as soon as they come. So maybe I'll start with a first question, which is, of course, an ongoing topic, pandemic, COVID, and this variant was still raging across Asia with a number of lockdown and new infections happening across the region. Just want to get your feel and your feedback, your impression about what has been the impact again on pandemic in the last 16 months that we've been through already on the cold chain operations, specifically in Asia. What have you been observing, and what are the new trends as a result of this pandemic? Anybody who would like to start? Go ahead.
I can start.
Ishita.
So I think the demand for cold chain has gone through the roof, right? I think that is probably the biggest trend we've seen from a cold chain perspective. It's come in obviously from the whole vaccines distribution. I mean, it's an unprecedented challenge for humanity, right? To vaccinate the entire population in a record span of time. And somehow the vaccines you're working with are very sensitive to environmental and temperature factors. So I think last year there was an estimate that we will need 15,000 planes worth of vaccines. I think that has doubled since then. So it's really brought to life the challenges that we have in cold chain, not just from sort of an intercontinental delivery, but more so on the ground handling and then sort of delivering to the clinics and vaccination sites, the actual infrastructure and process control challenges we have. The other aspect has obviously been the food supply chains, because people are obviously buying a lot more food at home, frozen products purchased a lot more, restaurants have closed down to a large extent due to all these lockdowns, and that growth has also shot up. I mean, the numbers ranging from anything from 100% growth to 400% growth, and I guess the jury is out there. We would only find out maybe in a couple of years' time. But essentially, the demand has shot up. Infrastructure, I feel, is still trying to catch up, and also the awareness around it.
Okay. Thank you, Ishita. Yeah, Gopal?
Yeah, adding to like, I mean, as what Ishita said, like, yeah, we see the final product, that's a vaccine. But to create vaccine, you also need the APIs, you need the intermediate, you need the solvents. So even they have to be stored in a temperature either in ambient or 15 to 25 or 2 to 8 degrees. Even that infrastructure is growing up, and it has to grow up. The pharmaceutical industry is poised to, I mean, grow at least by, say, 3 to 4 times in the next, say, 10 years. And parallelly, the infrastructure like the cold chain warehousing, the ambient warehousing, whatever is related to pharma has to grow hand in glove, else pharma will fall short. Mm-hmm. So things are up, especially in India, things are at a higher stakes, thanks to the stabilized government, thanks to the land we have got, thanks to the climate, thanks to resources, thanks to the manpower. India is again poised to capture the growth of the pharmaceutical industry of the world. Thank you.
Yeah, Brett?
Yeah, Max, I think the discussion around vaccines is really brought supply chain and the cold chain supply chain to the mainstream media, and we're really seeing a major focus on production to patient cold chain capabilities in a way that we probably haven't seen in the industry before. A lot of focus on how volumes can be sustained We talked about the 15,000 aircraft that might be required. But in the Asia region so far, we really haven't had access to the vaccines that are required. And that means that every unit that comes our way is extremely valuable. And so the performance capability of the supply chain has to be lifted accordingly. It's almost zero defect when you've got such a high demand and such a low availability of supply still, especially for Asia. So that's put a lot of focus on the different stakeholders in the supply chain, from the production to the carriers and the forwarding partners. And our business has been very much focused on the last mile delivery. So once the vaccines come into the market, how do we get those to the patient? And certainly, as we've seen mRNA vaccines for the first time with temperature requirements and volumes at sub-zero requirements of -25 and down to -80. So that's really changed the nature of the storage and handling requirements for last mile providers like ourselves, and that includes the infrastructure that we have available for storage, as well as the packaging systems that we have for those temperature requirements, and then also for the service partners that are involved in that last mile to patient, how we manage the training and the upskilling to deal with the vaccine handling as well.
Okay.
Max,
yes,
if I
we
may,
have Troy.
Yeah, Max,
yeah, Troy,
if I
go
may,
ahead.
I think just to follow on from a few comments that Ishita and Brett just made, what we're seeing is actually an acceleration of trends that were already present in the market. So COVID actually as an accelerator, particularly for those disruptive platforms. We hear a lot about, see in our daily life, the continued increased adoption around e-commerce, both for home delivery, for grocery items that require cold chain capability, and of course the vaccines that were just mentioned, in terms of strategic stockholding, and that kind of unbroken supply chain, but also the adoption and rapid adoption of technology. So a bias now towards bringing in much more automation throughout the supply chain to reduce human contact, and also to increase and support these new disruptive channels that we see across the Asia landscape. Well, actually, when we look at e-commerce sales, every $1 billion of e-commerce sales means that there needs to be a correlated build-out, a property build-out, warehouse build-out of around 1.25 million square feet. Not all of that would be cold chain, of course, but a substantial amount would be considered for mixed use and even dedicated facilities. So it means that for every $1 billion of sales of disruptive e-commerce that's happening across the Asia landscape, another 1.25 million square feet of modern warehousing needs to get built or absorbed by the networks. And the main drivers of that are actually mostly e-commerce companies, but also the 3PLs that handle a diverse range of products, including lead logistics providers that are specialists in cold chain. And actually, when it comes to pharma, most of the solutions have been actually small. They're, in some cases, just freezers near an airport. But there are a few examples of mass storage for vaccines now coming around the region. There's one in Korea from a blue chip backed investor called EMP Bellstar, with almost 150,000 square meters of ultra cold capable storage in the Incheon area, which is quite exciting to see that some of these investors are now also waking up and accelerating their investment plans in the area. We see quite a lot of adoption now of investor strategies to deploy capital in the cold chain space and meet the demands and the big gap in cold chain capacity across most Asian markets.
Okay, thank you very much, Troy. Wayne, Troy mentioned, the need of for technology. What's your take on this, on cold chain?
Yeah. I think Troy made some great points. Over the last 16 to 18 months, we've seen many different types of disruption. and every one of us in our role within supply chain has had to respond to those disruptions. But I think, and that's a key driver going forward as well. It's not just about disruptions, but it's about being agile. I think the industry is going to grow. I mean, there's already some speakers who have talked about growth and projections, but I think it's also going to evolve, and it's going to change, and that pace of change will also increase. So I think we're going to see investment in technology around that. We're going to see an increase in demand for track and trace of pharmaceuticals, food products, and other areas. So track and trace, temperature monitoring, live sensors. We're also going to see, I think, a big growth in the packaging around cold chain. You've already seen, as Troy kind of talked about, that last mile, and Brett as well, that last mile element. Just during lockdowns, food delivery, temperature control, and for hot and cold products, and your favorite ice cream.
Okay, all right. Chovi, you are part of the, Ishita has always mentioned there's a lot of planes being required with Asia. Share with us what you guys are doing. Yeah.
Yep. So Wayne mentioned being agile, and I guess that that was one of the biggest things we had to do at the onset of the lockdown, when literally 95% of our entire fleet of 200 aircraft were grounded and not flying anywhere, right? So we realized that the cold chain capacity was required because we knew the vaccines were coming, and we knew that we had the network to be able to fly aircraft to not only the major airports around Southeast Asia, but the smaller airports around the region as well. So on the very onset, we decided, you know what, let's just jump straight into it. We have to create a cold chain capability within our airline network, and which was what we did. And eventually, all of that, of course, paid out. We did manage to move vaccines across the region, and not just between countries, but within domestic sectors, within countries as well. For example, in Malaysia, to the rural areas in East Malaysia, in Indonesia as well, Philippines and Thailand. So to be able to adapt and to create something out of nothing was actually very, very exciting. At the same time, scary as well, because we were never, ever exposed to the entire cold chain industry prior to the pandemic. And we were glad that it all worked out in the end. And just touching on what Brett mentioned earlier, when Southeast Asian nations started procuring vaccines, the assumption was that it was going to arrive in the millions of doses, but that was not the case at all. So we were prepared to mobilize our entire wide-body fleet of Airbus A330 aircraft, which could take up to 11 pallets. However, when the deliveries started coming in, we realized that each of these pharmaceutical companies are only releasing thousands of doses at a time. So we're looking at 1 pallet, 2 pallets at the most for each flight. So to be able to have a cost justification to actually fly an aircraft all the way to Belgium, for example, was quite difficult for us. But in the end, it all worked out as we worked very closely with the individual governments in the region.
And is it still the case today where those, lots of vaccine are limited and you don't get a lot of volume right now?
Yes, that's exactly the case. But what we are seeing in the region currently, especially with the Chinese manufacturers, is that they are now exporting what they call fill and finish products. So the bottling and the finishing is actually done within the individual country itself for those vaccines to be actually used in that country. So we're seeing a very different approach to some of that as well. And when we look into AstraZeneca, for example, they actually have local manufacturing plants within Asian countries as well. So that kind of allows us to even capitalize on some of these intra-Asian transportation of such products.
I see. Okay, that's good. Sanjay, I know you're more focused on food, but maybe you can share what have you been observing again, what has been the impact of the pandemic on cold chain operation, but probably more specifically on food products, yeah.
Max, in fact, for the fruits and vegetable sector, COVID brought a lot of bad news in India because most of the capacity was redirected towards the vaccines, and 500 million doses were administered, and whatever little capacity was left was taken up by consumer foods or other consumer products, as well as products like chocolates or some premium fruits like banana to some extent for export market, and some of the e-commerce company and the modern retail companies definitely had some good share of that. But most of India is unorganized, and that sector has been, the cold chain revolution has totally bypassed that sector, and the government is recognizing that, and that's why the government wants to do. Imagine in a country, such a big country, where we have $300 billion worth of fruits and vegetables and the fresh produce sector, and out of that we have only about, the largest player like Snowman has about 125,000 pallet position, and the second one, Coldman, is distanced by almost half of that. Even Gaba mentioned about 18,000 pallets that he has got is only for the pharmaceutical sector. So the what is left for fruits and vegetables and other fresh produce sector is just a minuscule thing, and especially on the pack out stage and post harvest stage, there is hardly anything which is being deployed there, and as a result we continue to suffer. And I feel that it is not just the logistical challenges or the complexity of the cold chain operation that is impacting low uptake of cold chain technology in fresh produce sector, but it's also that the research probably, or the innovation has not really brought the kind of solutions which are needed. For example, if somebody were to transport these fruits and vegetables, they would want to do it as open as possible if it is without cold chain. But in cold chain, you have so much of concentration of ethylene that it starts impacting the quality of the produce. So we need those kind of infrastructure. Sometime near the villages, when the infrastructure or the cold rooms are created, the crop is only about 90 days, and what do you do with that infrastructure? It needs to move. So probably you need those kind of technologies. And when you have newer technologies like, okay, we do not have enough electricity, so solar powered cold rooms are becoming popular. By the time that technology will become affordable for the farmers, I can tell you that India will solve its electricity problem. So you would still have a innovation which is not really serving the core need of the sector. And what is the core need of the sector is a technology which is absolutely suited for those needs, and which can develop for the return cargo, and which can also take care of the mobility of the requirements. So when you have such kind of things thrown up as challenge, probably you will have a totally different kind of innovation coming out of the sector, which will not be the same what is there for the traditional sectors like pharmaceuticals and consumer goods.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. And then someone is mentioning in the Q&A that nearly 40% of the food produced in India is wasted every year due to fragmented food systems and inefficient supply chain. It's a very high number, and it's probably the same in many other Southeast Asian countries as well. We got a few questions now already, and again, I want to remind everybody that you guys can ask questions using the Q&A. So go ahead if you have a question, but I'll take that first question from Hong Yong. We're saying, nowadays, how are you maintaining all the qualification and certification such as GDP guideline as transportation and warehouse service provide in terms of pharmaceutical industry? Maybe that's a question for you, Brett.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one of the things we've worked very hard on is making sure that our quality management system at a regional level is very closely aligned with the quality management systems of the countries that we operate to, and the inputs to the quality management system include, because there are a number of regulatory and industry bodies who have promulgated regulations and guidelines and guidances, and because we represent over 300 companies in the region, so we've had to be able to build a robust QMS that includes the requirements of the international authorities, the EMA from Europe, MHRA, US FDA, WHO, there's the PICS, which is the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation System, ICH, which is another international government regulation organisation, and so we take the guidelines that they've promulgated, and we build that into a QMS, which means we then represent in our operating procedures the compliance requirements that our operations teams can execute against. So it's a very robust system. It's audited by our clients on a regular basis between 1 and 3 years, also by regulators on a fairly frequent basis. We have internal certification system in place for GSDP. All our staff and employees and our service partners are trained. So the answer is yes, we do operate to international quality compliance standards, and it's even with the larger volumes of vaccines, that's a well-established practice that we have in place.
Okay. Anybody else would like to comment on this question? Feel free to unmute yourself so I know that you can. Yeah, Kuba?
Yeah, and that's a big challenge here in India. Like, I mean, especially if you want to preserve pharmaceutical, you have to be a WHO GDP certification. And already Sanjay said that 90% of the Indian cold chain industry is unorganized, and probably less than 2-3% are a WHO GDP certification. Like in India, like, I mean, it's a developing country, unlike the West. So we still don't believe in QMS. Like, so it has to be inculcated. It's not like it's automatic. Like how business runs in the genes, QMS has to be inculcated. So especially after this COVID vaccine surge came up, at least the thinking came up. At least I have been speaking in quite a few webinars, telling that, I mean, India has got 10,000 cold storages, by the way. I mean, you'll be taken aback. 10,000 cold storages across India. But again, probably 95% are unorganized, standalone single products. Now, and one of the advantage in India has got, I mean, we have got cold storage in all parts of the country, like in east, west, north, south, villages, towns, etc. Now, these cold storages a smaller place have to be converted into a specialized food sector or a specialized pharma sector with WHO GDP guidelines. So the thinking must come from the cold chain Inc. of India. And
okay,
it's not very far.
All right, thanks, Kuba. Yeah, Ishita.
I think I'll just echo what Kuba said. Right? I think that analogy extends beyond India. It extends to Southeast Asia as well. I think there is obviously the certification, the regulatory aspect, but how it is implemented, whether the processes are in place, and whether people actually understand the value of those processes. I mean, in my life as a consultant, as an operations practitioner, I've actually been to facilities in sort of Asia where, I was proudly, somebody presented to me the fact that at night we turn off the freezers because we need to save electricity, and that way we optimize the overall cost of the cold chain. And then you go like really so it's a lot about training. And I mean, when we talk about technology in cold chain, I think there's this whole element of technology which comes with sensors, regulations, track and trace. But there's also the element of technology in really getting the basics around, the need for cold chain. What are the implications of a broken cold chain in pharmaceutical industry to the real operators? Because GDPs and all these frameworks stay in paper, but whether our operators who run the cold chain in reality on the ground understand it and understand the principles involved, especially in an unorganized cold chain industry like Asia, and by Asia I mean really Southeast Asia and South Asia, do we have to build that knowledge and the criticality aspect.
Okay. We got another question from Koshi asking, the cold chain is heating up. Why investors so excited about this logistics sector? Maybe this is a question for you, Troy. Is cold chain a profitable sector for most of the players right now?
Look, I think the question is a very timely one because, as many of us may know, there's a lot of capital chasing yield in the world today. There's a lot of pension fund money. There's a lot of private money that is looking for locations and platforms to deploy into to capture growth and to capture yield. And so one of the exciting and kind of attractive elements of cold storage in particular are the lease tenures that you get from clients. So if you look at most of the properties in what we call major markets or core markets across Asia, the lease tenures for cold chain are 3 or in sometimes 4 times longer than a typical warehouse lease. So 10 plus 5 years is a typical cold store lease for something above 10,000 square meters. You're also seeing yields on cost, which are double in most instances what you would find on a typical warehouse, a standard spec warehouse. So that means that the yield of 7.5%, 8% or more, you typically see on a modern scaled cold chain facility. And I think the other thing that is remarkable about where capital is, has identified these opportunities, which sets this asset class apart, and has shown that particularly the last half of 2020 and the first half of this year being the #1 asset class where investors are putting their money, is the ESG platform. And I don't think we've addressed that yet. I'm sure it'll come up at some point here in this seminar and maybe even in this panel. Cold storage facilities are massive users of electricity. And when it comes to a sustainability platform, if you can show effective carbon abatement through your cold chain, you're doing something that very few companies can do in the world today. And it means that you have to rely on a good set of partners who are either developing facilities for you or your own team internally to create the conditions where you can have either low energy, low carbon producing facilities, or find alternative sources of energy. And those two areas, I think, are not standard in this area, but are very important to the international capital and local capital as well, but predominantly the international capital, because they have mandates now from pension funds and other big sources of their funding to only deploy in sustainable assets or those with ESG metrics that are reported. So this is a very exciting time for cold chain, particularly in the asset side. Thanks for the question, by the way.
Yeah, and we have a question from Leon also, who's probably related to this, where he's saying, are cold chain players, particularly warehouse, concerned about high energy and emission intensity of the industry? So what are they actually doing to try to reduce the industry environmental impact right now? I mean, can you support a cold storage just with solar panels? Does that work, or it's not feasible today? Troy or anybody else? Yeah.
I am not a technical. I mean, I've built warehouses and retrofit them to use less energy and reduce carbon. But if anybody wants to jump in on the technical side, I think that would be welcome, Max.
Yeah.
I think we've certainly invested quite heavily in solar panel technology for the air-conditioned sections of our storage facilities, but the integrity of the storage condition for 2 to 8 and sub-zero makes us a little bit more wary at this stage. But I think we do recognise that as having a committed sustainability program that we're going to have to reduce our carbon footprint and our contribution to greenhouse gases. And so, I guess it's all on the table as to how we address that for the future. And we look at the types of cooling systems that we use, the types of panels that we're using in the construction of the infrastructure. the insulation systems I talked about. So it's an evolving discussion, I would say. But certainly in a number of the countries where we've built new facilities in the last 3-4 years, they do integrate solar technology or solar panels into the construction.
Okay.
What?
Yeah.
I-
Ishita, yeah. And then I'll come to you, Guba, after. Yeah, go ahead, Ishita.
So I think the innovation that I have seen applied, so again, not an expert on the buildings part of it, but what I have seen is innovation on the packaging side, and I think that's another way to actually improve the sustainability of the overall cold chain supply chain. So, there are new types of packaging with better materials, with better sort of radiating materials that actually reduce the excursion, so you have a more reliable cold chain, but also reduce the need for refers, changes, and so on and so forth. Also, packaging that you could actually reuse is being put into place quite often. And what I have seen recently happen is a lot of investment actually going into sustainable packaging for cold chain. So if you look at the portfolios of, for example, some of the startup accelerators in Singapore, every year they have been a few sort of packaging startups that have been quite generously funded, I would say. So there's an increasing attention, clearly, to Troy's point earlier on how do we sort of improve the sustainability standards in cold chain delivery. And it's been addressed at multiple levels, from infrastructure to packaging solutions.
Okay, yeah. Guba, you wanted to add something? Yeah,
Yeah.
Troy? Yeah.
So, yeah.
Guba
So,
first.
yeah, thanks. Yeah. So, we all know that cold chain has lots of investment. It's literally a white elephant. So it's not. When you're setting up a cold chain, a cost-benefit analysis has to be done thoroughly. We just go by multi-deep racking or a double deep racking or a 8 deep racking or a shuttle racking. So look at the product and then decide on the infrastructure. Just don't ape things what's there in the world. And apart from that, we put the best of the equipment. We put best of the innovation in technology, like the panels or the refrigerant or the cooling system and so on. But again, we come sometimes at a micro level, at a ground level, we fail to train our team to leverage on the strengths of the equipment and be prepared for the unseen challenges. So those are the things which generally are missed out. So the team should be trained it's not like, we keep seeing the cold chain disruptions. How do they happen? Lack of knowledge, lack of focus on the team that is driving at the ground level. So not just setting up a hardware, even the manpower is also critical.
Okay, yeah. Troy?
Yeah. Let me just chip in a little bit here. And again, it's kind of from the property side. But I think as we see it, there are two key elements of this whole subset of sustainability that we're talking about. Number one is around prop tech. So property technology. When you build a building, get it right? Do it in a way which uses the right kinds of designers and the right kind of materials, and is set up in a way to support the geography that you're in and the laborers that come onto your site, and maybe the other third parties as well, to make sure that you're not just wasting an opportunity to fritter away an electrical bill and create carbon where you don't need to. And I think there's a lot of technology there that I've seen from Bluetooth enabled sensors on electricity usage areas that can be, you can get a dashboard on a cell phone to see who's left a door dock open, or who's left the lights on, or even if your equipment is your cooling plant is running in the wrong way. But I think the main area that we're all really interested in is this kind of private-public partnership with governments, but also sources of funds that are really demanding that the energy sources themselves have some availability for alternative. And yes, as several folks have mentioned, Brett and others have mentioned here, I think, diligent, leading operators in the sector are already demanding that there's, solar panels and potentially wind in their location to create, direct electricity for air conditioning and lights in offices and charging MHE. But I think the bigger issue is, and from an industry standpoint, is how is the industry as a whole going to push governments to get a little more serious and put a little more attention here on some of these massive users of electricity and carbon generation. I mean, as Ishita will probably know, and anybody that's been to Singapore over the last 3 or 4 years, if you go into any of the food zones in Singapore, you'll find between 5 to a dozen cold chain facilities in a place like Jurong Fishery Port food zone. And each of those facilities is spending between 150 and 300,000 US dollars a month on electricity. So multiply that over even 30 facilities of that scale in Singapore, and Singapore is a single island, single country, now replicate, it's at the equator, and so there's a much more significant kind of needs throughout the year for cold storage. But think about that in terms of both the cost on operation and the impact on the environment. And I don't think anybody that I've seen so far at a government level has really taken that, not taking it seriously, but taking it into an implementation mode. I mean, there are some really interesting examples around the region, but it's going to take a combination of big money, capability on technology side, and then this will, I think, not just at a private level, but definitely at a meta level with governments and even trade organizations, I think, to take this much more seriously over the coming years. And I think, look, this is the time to talk about it. This is a great forum to talk about it. If we don't get it, I don't think anybody's going to get it.
Okay,
all right.
May I come in over here?
Very quickly, because we have a lot of questions and we only have 10 minutes to go. So Sanjay, go ahead, quick, and then we can jump into the other question.
Recently, there was an initiative which was launched by Rocky Mountain Institute and Conservation Labs and Alliance for the Energy Efficient Economy in US, and they announced in 2018 Global Cooling Prize. And you would be surprised, actually, this was won by an Indian company, the subsidiary of Daikin, and it was jointly won by GRI, which is a Chinese company, for the refrigeration. And the target was that you should be able to reduce the climate impact and the costs of energy utilization by at least 1/5 of that. And both these winners, which were announced about a couple of months back, they actually surpassed that limit of 1/5. So that means we all should be ready now in the next couple of years to change our air conditioning, because the cost is going to drop less than 1/5. So the climate impact is in proportion with that. So to answer that question, yes, the innovation is coming in a very big way to have lesser climate impact.
Okay. We have a question from Suyun. He's asking, how do you manage deliveries of vaccines? Somehow storage could be prepared, however, deliveries to thousands of clinics by validated vehicles within short period was a huge challenge. Anybody has anything to share on this? The delivery, the last mile delivery of those vaccine.
So I've been involved in some initiatives to design the vaccine supply chain. And I mean, I think in summary, it's definitely been a challenge. It's obviously varied a lot by market. So effectively, most governments, what they've tried to do is sort of outsource it by having a consortium of partners. A lot of it is actually government regulated. So the governments have released tenders where they have partnered with multiple sort of last mile companies to actually arrange the deliveries. Now they've obviously set out specifications on how should the vehicle be validated, what should be the regime around sort of making these deliveries, what are the handover points, and exactly how the allocation of vaccines to these different sites will happen. But I would say that so in some countries it's happened very well. So Singapore, I think we haven't heard of a lot of vaccines being wasted. But even in sort of other markets, mature markets like Hong Kong, we did hear of a lot of cold chain excursions in the last mile delivery, where I think significant amount of stock was wasted. And again, this is not any exception. Typically about 50%, in some cases as much as 50% of vaccines actually just get dumped because of excursions somewhere around along the value chain, and about 60% of that 50% actually happens in the last mile, because that's where we have the least control. Technology has come in a huge way to support this. Obviously, there are a lot of control towers that companies are going to. Microsoft has its solution. Pretty much every big sort of track and trace service has solutions, and governments are leveraging that with sensors and all of that. But it's, I would say, all in all, what I have seen, it works suboptimally, where you have more process control. Like in Singapore, it works better. When it comes to more challenging markets like Philippines, Indonesia, that's why you actually see that most of vaccination is only happening, for example, in the Metro Manila or in the central regions, rather than in the outskirts and islands, where reach still remains a very big issue.
Okay, we have another question from Mark. He's asking, what data do you want to see other than temperature and location in real time? Maybe that's a question for you, Wayne, or, have you ever, yeah?
I think
Go ahead.
It's a great question. I think temperature and location are probably two of the most important elements in terms of real time. But as Ishita just said, in cold chain, whether it's pharma, vaccines, or even food, where we lose control or where wastage occurs or product risk occurs is actually quite often in handover. And the further you get down the cold chain into that last mile where we have less control, those handover steps become less disciplined, less well governed. So I think the other thing that I would want as a practitioner for very high value goods or very precious temperature sensitive goods was visibility that those handover events were happening effectively in a controlled manner, and that they were going from authorized party to authorized party. Now that's bad enough in just food. But now take the legal requirements and the risk requirements we have for something like vaccine, where you need to be able to guarantee traceability for every one of those handover points and be able to prove that this is a real batch that was controlled, it was handed over, and it did get to the right destination. So in terms of real-time temperature and location, I think number one and number two. But then being able to have visibility of all of those handover points in that supply chain from origin to last mile.
There's also another question from Samir. That's for you, Ishita, but it's also probably for you, Chovi and Brett, about the packaging, which is, I think, very important in the cold chain. What have you, so Samir is asking, do companies really ready to invest into more reliable quality packing materials, which are costlier, moving, for example, from PU box instead of EPS thermocool box? What have you seen in the market? Maybe a Chovi first, and then I'll come back to you, Ishita and Brett. Chovi, I know you spent quite a bit of time on this at Teleport, yeah.
Yep, that's absolutely right, Max. So like what Ishita mentioned earlier, the packaging is key to how we can actually move some of these items to even places that do not have the adequate facilities to have a proper cold chain. I think this question can be answered in addition to Mike Hill's question, is how do we actually transport it across tough geography and terrain, like many islands in Philippines and Indonesia. And just to give an example, we actually had a client who required this sort of solution for us to transport it to the rural inland areas within East Malaysia. So what we actually did was we picked up the shipment from the cold storage facility in one of the major cities that's closest to that destination, and we fly it to the closest airport that is closest to that destination. And from then on, the last mile was basically just using 4x4s into the jungle, right? So how did we actually manage to maintain the temperature and ensure that there was no temperature excursion was essentially just the packaging. right? And the packaging that has been approved by the pharmaceutical company, it's then given to us, a time expiry in which that temperature can actually hold in that packaging. And as long as we deliver it by that time, it's ready to go at the destination.
Okay. Ishita?
I think very well summarized by Chavi. What I do notice now happening, and I think really rightly so, is packaging moving into the design stage of the product. So especially when you talk about oncology products or high-end diagnostics products these days, packaging design is actually a significant element of the product design itself. So when they do the user testing or when we are sort of really trying to test the field experience of the product, packaging is taken into account for that. And that actually not just influences the overall packaging, but maybe the actual product design as well, right? So exactly what type of components would you use? Or can you actually break the packaging in a way that, elements, for example, reagents that you need in diagnostics product, which really need say 2 to 8 or minus 20 storage, are actually sent separately so that your overall space requirement and volume requirement for the cold chain part of your product is lower. So it's really moved upstream. I think that's one investment companies are making, and that's phenomenal, right? Because that helps us design products that are better and easier to transport to consumers. The other aspect is also, I see companies in the pharma space, at least definitely investing, working with say Softbox, so some of the providers of packaging solutions to come up with specialized packagings that work for their products, especially those which require, for example, nitrogen storage or like really extreme temperature storage, or products which require activation because they are sent to the clinical site for administering. Many oncology products come in that category. So we also see investment happening there. So there are arms within pharma companies that are starting to focus on that. So clearly, it is a growing need that companies are addressing, because at least from a life sciences perspective, right, the whole drug portfolio is moving to colder products, right, as we move into biosimilars and more active therapies. So it is something that they need to address more proactively than they've had to in the past.
Okay, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, we've made significant investment in the new the newer packaging systems using vacuum insulated panels and phase change materials, and part of that is because it extends the period of time that we can maintain the temperature at the required level, but also because we get a significant increase in terms of the number of cycles of reuse. So whereas the traditional styrofoam and ice gel type packaging systems might have lasted 12 months, 18 months, we're getting 4, 5, 6 years of use out of these new packaging systems. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we use them in the smaller delivery zones like Singapore and Hong Kong, because obviously if you've got packaging systems that last 4 or 5 days, you don't need them in those markets. But certainly in some of the other markets, we've also been able to reduce our air freight requirement by converting air freight to road transport for branch shipments. So these systems across the different temperature ranges at 15 to 25, 2 to 8, minus 15 to minus 25, and even down to minus 60. The technology is improving and will continue to do so. It's a very fast-moving space.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for your time. So I see a number of other questions so we won't be able to take due to a time constraint. I want to wrap up this panel now and also give you a chance to spend some time on the floor to actually do some virtual networking. I would like to ask each of the panelists maybe to stick around for another 10 minutes or so. So if those delegates who have questions can do it, they can actually find you and ask you the question directly. So thank you again for your time. Thanks for all the questions. Thank you very much, Brett, Guba, Ishita, Sanjay, Chovi, Troy, and Wayne for sharing your insight. Those panels are always too short. We could go on and probably speak for another 1 hour or so, but I understand it's lunchtime starting to happen across Asia, and also people want to do some networking as well on the floor. So thanks again for your input. And again, I want to invite everybody to stick on and stay with us on the floor, and then we can continue with networking. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Great discussion.
Thanks, Henry.
Thanks all.